Okay, so I've hit the record button and I'm here with Michael Brown, CEO and co-founder of Vicarious PR. Michael has years of industry experience as a journalist, reviewer, editor and PR and marketing specialist. Bootstrapping Vicarious from the ground up in as little as 3 years, he's turned a boutique agency into an international award-winning video game PR and marketing machine. Michael's headed up campaigns for some of the industry's biggest games over the past few years and has also won the 2018 PR New Rising Star Award. Michael, welcome and thanks for joining us today at the Business of Indie Games.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome. I'll dive straight in. Can you tell us a little bit about your what games that you've promoted and what your history is in PR? In games?
Sure. So Vicarious was started around 3 years ago. And then since that time, we've covered everything from large AAA games on PC and console to mobile games. So things like Ring of Elysium, PUBG Mobile, Game of Thrones Beyond the Wall, and countless others. We particularly enjoy working with indie games as well. So we try and have a nice balance between the two.
Wow, that's fabulous. I mean, it sounds like PUBG could have been something, just that would have kept you busy, right?
Yeah. They tend to, games like that tend to, especially large multiplayer ones. One of the things that we do, I think, well, is that we try and make every campaign a little bit different rather than sending out template stuff. I like to try and make a campaign centered around a game's unique selling points and strengths. And so that keeps it kind of interesting because we try and do something a little bit different every single time, which is sometimes challenging, as you can imagine, but it keeps it, getting from boring at least.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's like that makes everything tailored rather than templated, which is right. Brilliant for your customer as well, I would say.
Well, that's the goal anyway.
Yeah. And we're here to talk today about massive shifts in games media in the last year. And I'd love it if you could tell our audience, some of what's been going on and how this affects new indie devs and studios alike.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of big shifts in the past couple of years, I think, and I think some of them have been coming on for a long time. But over the past, say, 3 years, I've seen a particular shift, even more so towards inventory-led journalism rather than. And what I mean by that is, essentially, you will often find many of the sites focusing on maybe 3 or 4 of the most popular games around. And, say any given website writes 10 articles a day, maybe 7, 8 of those articles are just focused on those top games. Whereas it used to be, you had quite a wide variety on every site. Sites tend to be moving away from that now. And it's kind of understandable on one hand because those 3, 4 top games consist of 80-90% of websites traffic that day. And so what that has meant for indies in particular is that it's gotten super competitive, and it was already competitive before, but even more so now in terms of trying to get, those remaining 1 or 2 articles a day. You have on any given day, even back when I was a journalist, and it's getting even worse now, you still have maybe anywhere between 300-400 people competing for the same 2 spaces on a daily basis. So I would say within the media, that in particular has been a massive shift. And I think outside of that, you also have things like the influencer marketplace has changed quite dramatically over the past couple of years, because when YouTubers and Twitchers rose to fame, it was very easy to get coverage from those people. And they were always, happy to take free keys and do coverage for that. But now you've kind of, as that space has, I wouldn't say matured, but is growing up slightly, influencers are really starting to realize the value that they bring themselves. And so what you get now is kind of, instead of can I have it, yes, fire me over a free key, you get fire me over a check for $5,000. So it's become a very competitive place, and more so every day. And I think, it's causing PR people like me and indie developers to really having to think outside of the box in terms of how do we promote our game. Because, years and years ago, when Steam was actually a curated platform, you had the benefit of just being on there, and being on there was special. But now with over 27 games a day launching, you just don't have the luxury of being able to be, at best, laissez-faire with your marketing and your PR approach.
Yeah, thank you. God, that's fascinating. What are the kinds of things that that indies and PR folk have to think out the box? You said, what the kind of lateral ideas how do you combat this? Because unless you've got a big budget, you can't pay an influencer $5,000, can you?
No, I think what I advise often indie developers to do. So one of the things, one of the biggest issues, there's two biggest issues for indie developers right now is, one, they either don't budget for marketing when they should, and oftentimes you will find that developers come speak to me and they'll go, okay, it's a month from launch, what can I do? And I'm like, well, not much, because it's a month from launch. But on top of that, they'll go, I spent $250,000 on development, but I have nothing left in marketing. And what you actually should be doing is sitting down at the very start and go, okay, I'm going to spend 250,000. So do you know what? I'm going to cut out that feature and save 50,000 for marketing. And that's, I get from a development perspective, like, well, I really wanted that feature, but at the same time, you wouldn't make a toy and then not go and try and sell it, right? And it's the same principle. If you're making a product, unless it's a very much a hobby for you, you have to think the business side of it and go, how do I sell this to people? And so, I think business development and business planning is like a big issue. But I also think that one of the things developers should be doing straight out of the gate is not leaving marketing to like a couple months from launch or even 6 months from launch. What you need to be doing is starting day one and create all your social pages, right? Because if you can prove, one of the things I always say to people is have proof of concept, right? So if you're developing a game and you can prove that people want this game by having a really robust community on your social and having a really vibrant Discord with a couple of thousand players in it, and you've built that up over the 2 years of development, by the time you do get to like when you want to do your big marketing pushes 6 months out, 3 months out, that kind of thing, it's going to be much easier to justify that from, especially as a journalist who's thinking, how is this game going to get me traffic? Because that's all I care about. Is this going to get me clicks? Is this going to get me views? And so if you can prove and you can go, oh, look, our Facebook has 15,000 people on it and it's all organic, right? And we've built that up over time. If you can prove that there's an audience for this, that makes getting coverage much, much easier. And so you have to think about it like a value transaction when it comes, because a lot of developers and sometimes PR professionals, unfortunately, they think of it like they come to the table begging for scraps from journalists or influencers. They go, please cover me, please cover me. We're an indie game. Well, remember that there's 400 people that day doing the exact same thing. So if you can come to the table with a value proposition and say, we've got this really cool game, it's really unique, and we've also got an established audience of like 25,000 people, that makes it much more interesting for a journalist to go, hey, maybe they've got something here. And so I think we have to fundamentally change the way that developers think about marketing and think about community growth. I think building communities now is more important than ever before, especially when, if you're launching a game on Steam in particularly, with the amount of competition that you're going to face on any given day, even if you avoid all the AAAs, you're still going to launch with 20 other titles that day. Having a really solid foundation to tap from day one is more vital than ever.
Oh, thank you. It's really valuable information, actually. And would you say that Discord is the best channel to start building that community?
I think Discord is a really great place to funnel people into. I mean, what you want to create from the get-go is you want to create what is known as a marketing funnel, and particularly for community building. I think one of the best ways to interact with community is through Discord, because Facebook and Twitter are all well and good, but it's still very impersonal. Whereas if you use Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is, and you've used them to, I would say, reach the masses, but then funnel those in after that point. So say they like your Facebook page, and then you always promote your Discord and funnel all those people in your Discord. And what you end up with is a really great place to interact with fans of the game. It's very personal. It turns people from just a casual, interested person to a really loyal fan of the studio and the game, because they get to interact with the developer and feel a part of the progress as it goes through. And then that way, Discord itself is a really great way to, communicate with fans on day one, especially because with Facebook, you post on Facebook and there's like a 15% chance that they'll actually see it. So at least with Discord, everyone's going to be there. You're going to be able to, contact everybody, and that way it's a much more better experience overall.
Thank you. I mean, this is already turning into a very insightful interview for our audience, and I very much appreciate it. Can you tell me, what do you see happening in the next 6 months in this sort of shifting games media landscape?
I think in the next 6 months in particular, I think we're likely to see more of the same. I think, it's going to be a challenge to get coverage, especially for indies. I think without really good education on what, indies need to do marketing-wise from day one, I think it's going to continue to be a struggle. Steam sales are declining rapidly all the time at the moment, and I think that's partly due to the oversaturation, but as well as just the lack of good marketing on the developer's side. In terms of the media, I think we're going to see more of the same. I don't see any massive shifts really. I think we'll continue to see, particularly on the media side, I think we'll continue to see them trying to find ways to improve traffic and create content that gets clicks and views. The influencer side, I don't see any major, changes to what they're doing. I hope that they at least try and find a way to not only want money for coverage all the time, which would be great. But I certainly hope that it would be nice to have a couple of new platforms to actually broaden the landscape a little bit, as from YouTube and Twitch. I think Mixer is going to see some certain growth as well. And it would be great to have, hopefully, we can see a new generation of influencers within the gaming space start to come up out of the run, because I think it's gotten a little bit stagnant at the top with very established names, and I think it would at a certain point that content is going to become stale, and so hopefully we'll start to see some new names rise up, which will be interesting to see.
Yeah, great, thank you. You've spoken about indies putting aside a bit of budget and starting their marketing campaign from day one. Is there anything else that they can do to prepare for this sort of year ahead?
Yeah, I think, focus on building a community. And one of the things that of developers say to me is, well, I don't know how to do social media, or it makes me uncomfortable. And I think that's very natural. It's less of a case of doing it right, because there's no totally right way to do it. It's just about staying true to the game and staying true to you, and not sounding like a corporate faceless head office kind of thing. But I think one of the things that is very easy to do is just plan it out, because a lot of developers, what they'll do is they'll go into a cycle of, right, I know I need to do this, but I don't want to do it. And so what I'll do is I'll start developing, and then I just won't have time. Whereas what you should actually do is just schedule like 15 minutes a day to go and interact with your social media pages and your community pages. I think outside of that, I think it's super important to go to any events that you can. Even if you can't attend like the major ones like PAX, because they're expensive, and that's totally understandable. If you can attend any like local events where you can at least just show your game and show it to people, that's a really great way of on the cuff refining your game's key messaging. So just using that, like trying to refine that one sentence pitch to describe the game to people. And it's a great way to do that because you're able to see the reaction, and you'll be able to see either they're really excited or they're absolutely confused about what you just said and have no idea what you're talking about. And so that's a really great way to do that. I think one of the things that you should be trying to do is, if you want to be in a position later on to talk to journalists in particular, one of the great ways to do that is to really heavily research who you're wanting to talk to. Because one of the things that never ever works is just throwing everything at a wall and sending out 600 emails, all of the same email, and hoping something sticks, because it's never going to happen. It is much better to be in a position where you know who you want to talk to from each website, because you know that you followed them on Twitter, you know that person loves the genre that you're making, and then come up with a way to interact with that person organically, whether it be at shows, whether it be just, one of the things I hate people doing is they follow, a journalist or they follow an influencer, and then the first thing they do is they message them about their game. Don't do that. Actually build up a relationship over time before you head into talking about your game. So just follow them on Twitter and then like a couple other posts and maybe respond to a couple other posts. If they like a movie that you like, talk about the movie, and just build up that relationship over time. And then once that's actually happened and they know who you are and they know that you're not trying to shove something down their throat because you want something from them, that's the point where you go, hey, it'd be really great if you could check out my game. I think you're going to really like it because of this reason, this reason, and this reason. And that will work much better for you in the long run than, going in with the sole purpose of, hey, I want you to do something for me. So I think those things are super important. And I think the last one would probably be, make sure to put time and effort into developing really good assets for any kind of website, social media, and Steam page. One of the things that we constantly see is developers just taking a screenshot of a landscape in their game, and it's like, what does that show? That doesn't show anything. Spend a really good day creating some really solid screenshots that are action filled, that have really good camera angles. And I know it can be a pain depending on the game that you're making, but it is worth the investment because you only get one first impression on pages like that, and you have to put your best foot forward.
Yeah, I mean, that stretches right through to the game itself in development. I mean, how many games are there with a corridor full of crates? Do you want to play a game in a corridor full of crates, or do you want to play a game in a circus or a fun fair? It's just as obvious to put, great assets make for great fun and great gameplay. And then they also stand out for the marketing materials as well, right?
Exactly.
And so you're talking about building relationships with journalists and influencers. And is that, do you mean just like striking up a conversation and getting to know them and watching their work and then making comments in their chat box and stuff?
Yeah. Come into it like, treat them as an actual person and not as a tool that you want to do something, right? Because they are actual people, and so it's much better to actually treat them like that, and then ask for something when you've built up a relationship. Because you ask anybody, if I just send you an email saying I want you to do this, it's not really particularly polite, or it's not going to make you feel good, is it? Right? So why would you expect a journalist to be the same just because it's their job to write about games? And so it is much better to spend time. And like I said, this is why you have to start straight away, right? Because if you start straight away, by the time that you actually need this stuff to happen, you've put the work in to build the relationship up.
Yeah. I mean, they'll probably ask you, what are you working on, right?
Exactly. So I think that's that's one of the reasons why you have to start early, is to really build those relationships up, and it takes time. And when you leave it so long that you're 6 months out of development, that's when, and you go, oh, I need to start doing something, and you start panic rushing to do it, and that's when you get really pushy, and that's when people don't like you anymore. So
yeah, understood. So you've talked a little bit about what to do at the start of a project and about building relationships. But I've heard you talk about like the need for a proper PR timeline. What advice do you have? How does that timeline run, I think is what I mean.
Sure. So I mean, this varies from game to game quite wildly, because ultimately, a 40-hour RPG is going to have a lot more to talk about than, a straight up 4-hour puzzle platformer. It ultimately comes down to the development timeline. It comes down to release dates. It has multiple factors within it, but it is good to try and get something down on paper where you're like, okay, I'm going to do this, then, and then build everything around those areas, so that you have a very clear timeline and a very clear direction in where you want to go. By doing that, you're able to look for opportunities that otherwise wouldn't be there. So, for example, if something, there's a big topic in the media, for example, loot boxes, right? If everyone's talking about loot boxes and you have something relevant to say on loot boxes within your game, I think, you can then utilize that to try and get coverage as well. But, one of the things that I always say to people is develop a marketing calendar and a PR timeline, so that, one, you can stick to it. Because if you don't have something planned down, then it's going to get moved around and switched up, and it's not going to be done properly, right? So you have to be able to create a timeline to stick to something within reason, because obviously, game development is good. Game development, things get delayed, but ultimately you should try and stick to any kind of timeline. It also forces you to really think about what is going to be interesting in your game, right? Because when you create a PR timeline, you think about, okay, well, so what am I going to do to talk to media? What am I going to do on social media? What am I going to do with influencers? It forces you to come up with ideas outside of we're going to announce a release date today. Today is launch day. Because everybody does those things, and those things are boring. So it forces you to kind of think about those ideas, and it really helps stimulate that. I also think that, one of the great things about doing a marketing calendar and PR timeline early is to really enforce what we were saying on before, is to make you interact with that side of the business, even though you may not like to interact with it. And doing that sooner rather than later means that you can actually start earlier. And the earlier you start, like we said, is the better way to go about it.
Thank you. Do you have any examples of things that stand out, other than today's launch day?
Sure. I mean, so it varies depending on the game, right? So it ultimately, there's lots of factors that comes into it. So you can think about the theme of your game, the story of your game. Is your game political? Does your game have something? Is it a social commentary? Does it have something to say that's relevant? Or is it, is there something about your game that's unique within the mechanics? All of those kind of things, are well worth it. One of the things we did for a client a couple of years ago was we focused on talking. They were from an Eastern European country that doesn't have a very large game development scene. And so what we did was we focused outside of the normal release dates and all that kind of thing. We tried to focus on getting articles written about the game industry scene within that country and having them included within that and having them be the actual interviewer. And so what that allowed them to do was they got coverage for their own game development studio from a business standpoint, but it also really put them on the spotlight within that scene, and let them become an industry leader within their own game development space. And there's just unique stuff like that you
Yeah,
can do.
that's really clever, actually.
And I think, going back to why create a PR timeline, one of the great things about doing, big calendars is to set yourself incremental targets of what do you want to achieve, right? So by month 3, I want to achieve 500 followers on Twitter and 500 followers on Facebook, and being able to, work towards those goals and track the data within all of those platforms really helps shape where you're heading down the line, and it really helps you refine everything about your outward facing materials, whether it be how you describe the game to people, what screenshots you use, and that kind of thing. All of those go together.
Thank you. So Vicarious take a very different approach to working with their clients, analytical, testing based, setting up systems to work out the messaging that works and then the messaging that doesn't work for a game discovery. You've lots of experience in applying a data-driven and analytical approach to PR. What can you tell us about Vicarious's unique approach and how that works?
Sure. So one of the things that has always bothered me about marketing in general, but PR specifically, is people will complain that it's too vague or it's not quantifiable. And I've always said that isn't true. And they go, well, prove it. And so I did. And I went out, and when we started the company, we'd worked in journalism for a couple of years, and before that we'd worked in other industries on the business end and on the analytical end. So we'd all had experience with data, we'd all had experience with marketing from other industries. And so we put that all together within video games PR, because one of the things that I never liked hearing about was companies or freelancers who you would pay for a month, and then all they would do was send you an article, it's like a spreadsheet with links, like with a couple of links on, and go, there you go, that was what we did. And it's like, well, how valuable are those articles? How many people saw those articles? Where's the quantifiable data that I can show ROI? And I think ROI is super important in everything that you do. And for us, internally, I believe that, all my employees and my staff, they should always be looking to improve their skill set and come away with, new experiences and try unique creative things. Because I think if you don't do that, then you're just not having a good time in the general sense. So, and I can't expect my employees to improve on something when we've got no data to see, have a baseline on. So when we came into it, I wanted to create something that really tracked as many data points for PR as possible. And so we tried to track things like, so we use a couple of different software things, a couple of different formulas, and a bunch of other stuff that I won't bog down into detail with today. But in essence, we try and track and monitor everything that we can possibly monitor when it comes to PR and outreach. So that comes from the start of outreach, sending the emails out. So we track everything from open rate to even down to where does the journalist not care anymore when they go down the email. So if they're not opening the email, then there's a problem with the subject header. If they open the email and go halfway down the page, what's the problem there? Is it the assets that they don't like? Is it the descriptions they don't like? Is there too much text? And we track like every individual thing all the way down to actually getting the article, where we track, because one of the things I don't like is just saying, well, you got an article in Rock, Paper, Shotgun and they have 15 million online readers a month. There you go. Well, 15 million people didn't read that article. So one of the things that is super important to me is trying to accurately estimate, which we do, how many people actually saw the article. And then, having the social aspect to it. So tracking all the social shares and tracking the mentions, and really combining all of these different data points to get an accurate picture of the actual value of any given article. And, by doing that, I think we create something that is not only good for clients, but I think it's actually useful. We're giving them something useful back, other than, oh, we got you a really nice, spot in IGN or Rock Paper Shotgun or whatever. We're actually giving some actionable data that they can take away and actually use themselves. And a perfect example of this was a client that we had 6 months ago who came to us, who was an indie client, and they said, I really want to do this thing, but I don't have that much money, and I'm trying to get a publisher, and I'm trying to get an investor, and I'm trying to show the investor that, this is going to be something good. And so what we did is we did a little campaign for them. We did a little Kickstarter, and we tracked all the data, and we put everything together and created a really well-rounded, data-driven analysis. And then 2 months later, they were signed by a publisher, because they could prove in hard data terms, this, if you give me this amount of money, if you back me and support me, this is what can happen. So I think one of the things that for me is super important, because I want to be able to know, my clients are getting something other than, just the coverage that they want us to get for them. I think it's super important to track all the data points and being able to find insights outside of just the normal, what the journalist says.
Oh, that's great. I mean, so much has come up for me there. I hope I can remember all my questions around that now. Do you provide kind of that data-driven system? And do you provide marketing services as well as PR, full stop?
Yeah, so we do both PR and marketing, yeah.
Yeah, so would you also run that system across marketing platforms in direct-to-consumer communications and stuff?
Yeah, so we do it. We try and track everything data-wise on both sides, on PR and marketing. So, because it's super important, especially on marketing, it's important to treat it like a scientific experiment rather than, yes, in PR marketing, there is a creative aspect to it, and there is like the highbrow, okay, what's the creative idea? How are we going to format this? What's the wording that we're going to use? But it's also, I think the implementation and methodology has to be taken into like a scientific experiment, where you're like, okay, let's try this, this, and this, see what works, see what doesn't work. Why is that not working? Let's optimize it. And that's just ultimately what marketing is about. It's about the process that you go through, which is why, I always say to people, okay, so you're going to run some Facebook ads. How are you going to do that? And they're going to go, and then, the reply I often get is, well, I'm going to make an image and then just go. I'm like, no, that's not how to do it. You have to test out different images with different audiences and really hone it down to see what works better, so that you end up, because the goal with any marketing campaign is getting the cost per acquisition to its lowest point. And you have to do that through a set of methodologies, rather than just, I'm creative and I'm hoping that this is going to work somehow. So you have to combine both.
I mean, it sounds like you even have to sort of split, test, and try different subject headings in your emails to get them ready.
Yep, we do that all the time. That's something that we do to help a client nail down the messaging, right? Is, okay, so we'll send out the announcement of the game, and then we'll A/B test the subject heading, we'll A/B test the email, we'll A/B test the assets, and then we'll see what works. And if both doesn't work, then we'll try again. And if one works and another, we'll double down on the one that does work. And it's ultimately about, coming up and optimizing with the best way to do it, because, as much as experienced as we are, we never know 100% what's going to work and what doesn't work. All we can do is use our experience and creative process to be able to come up with something that we think's got a really good shot. And the amount of times that we've had developers come on and we've done marketing campaigns or PR campaigns, and they go, okay, and I say, who is your demographic that you're targeting? And they'll go, I'm targeting this demographic. And then actually what happens is their demographic is completely different to what they thought it was going to be. Happens quite regularly. And so I think, making sure that you're tracking all the data ensures that you can pivot any kind of marketing campaign much more quickly. Because if you're not tracking anything, you're just hoping that something's going to happen. And then when something doesn't happen the way you want it to, you're never quite sure why, because you're not tracking any data. Whereas if you can see, if you're tracking all of your data and then suddenly you realize that, oh, my audience isn't men 18 to 45, it's actually females 18 to 45 in large spades, then you're able to actually go, okay, well, clearly that demographic likes my game more than anybody else. So let's pivot the marketing, let's pivot the messaging and go for that demographic more and double down on that. And without tracking data, you can't do that.
Yeah, thank you. God, that's really interesting. And as part of your service, you mentioned the Facebook cost per acquisition. Do you help your clients lower that cost by refining and honing the message?
Yeah, we try and do all of that. So we try and make sure, we can run everything from, we can handle all of the campaigns from start to finish, from, designing the creatives to implementation, or if they want us just to come in and help them optimize what they're already doing, we can do that. We're fairly flexible in that regard.
Thank you. And also you mentioned Kickstarter. Did you run the campaign on behalf of the developer, of your customer?
Yeah, we've done a couple of Kickstarters now. So we've helped them run them. We've run them ourselves for them. So we can do either or. It doesn't really matter. What's important to me is just the collaboration process. I'm not one for, we get all different types of clients. So we get ones that just want to sit back and just go, here you go, you do it. Or we get ones that want to be involved. And either one is absolutely fine by me. It's just a case of, being able to have fun with it and try and do something a little bit different.
Wow. And it certainly sounds like you're offering a very robust service. And you work with indie developers as well as the big boys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I've got a question here. It says, how can indies with no budget start to test their PR and apply actual data to their PR activities? Is it possible without a budget to do stuff?
I think, yeah. I always advise people not to do DIY PR. If you can afford not to do it, don't do it, right? Because it is ultimately a full-time job, and you actually need experience and to be good at it. If there's no way you can do it, even if you try and business develop and you've tried to plan ahead and you still don't have any budget, I think there are ways to do it. So using a mailer is really good. Now, bear in mind, when I say use a mailer, I don't mean send the same email out to everybody, but using a mailer is a great way. Something like MailChimp or anything like that is a great way to track some data behind any email campaigns that you do. And I think, one of the things, if you want to go really basic, you can do something as simple as, okay, I've got 10 journalists here, and so you split them and you go, okay, so 5 and 5, I'm going to send 5 a certain email heading, and then I'm going to send another 5 another email heading, and then you see which one works. And then so if one email heading gets 2 responses, the other email doesn't get anything, then you use that email and then you do that with the next 20 or whatever. So there's multiple ways to try and track data for very little cost. Even on Facebook, social media comes with its own analytics and everything like that, and you can just try and utilize all of those different things. One of the best ways to do it on a really small scale budget is to just simply use Google Analytics, right? And funnel everybody to your website. And then you'll be able to see kind of the behavior that you get from your website in terms of who's clicking, which traffic's coming from where, which demographics there are, who's clicking what, how long are they staying on the site, who's clicking to Steam page, everything like that. You're able to, it's a great way to do it.
Oh, that's great. And I've got 2 more questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
One is, do you have a sliding scale, of costs for like the indie developer who may not have the budget, right up to the big guns?
Yeah, I think it depends on what kind of services that you want. In terms of PR, I think you would need, at a minimum, for any kind of I would say for a minimum of if you want to sell some copies, let's say you want to actually sell some copies, I think you need a minimum of anywhere between $25,000 and $50,000. I think $50,000 is the place that's going to get you a decent launch. It's not going to be it's not going to be over the moon, but that gives you a really solid chance of selling some copies and being able to come away from it and go, that was a successful launch. I think, budget options would be a minimum of around, I think, anywhere between 18 to 25. That's going to get you some decent PR and maybe some, social media marketing, but you're not going to get very far on that kind of budget because you've got to think about, how long is that going to last you in the long run? And you really want to run a campaign, 6 months, 6 months or over. Yeah. So I think it doesn't, I wouldn't say there's a limit, a minimum to anything, but I think it's super important to understand the realities of the business and understand that you are going to have to spend some money to make some money. And, if you're not prepared to do that, then you have to be prepared to not sell anything. So.
Thank you. That's really clear. And so my final question is what do you have like 3 tips or 3 hints or some basic advice, distilled advice in a nutshell that you could give to the developer?
Yeah, I think my distilled advice would be start early. I think day one, build your social pages, start your community outreach. Day one. Even if you don't have anything much to say, just post whatever you're working on the occasion. I think so. Focus on community building. That's going to be key. I think the second one would be plan and do business development correctly. So make sure you have a budget. There's a ton of indie game funds around that help with development costs, but ultimately, the buck stops with you. And if you are actually wanting to, create a games company and make a living off this, then you have to sell copies. And if you don't sell copies, you're never going to do this, for a living. So you have to plan in advance to actually be able to spend some marketing money. And I think the third one is that when you're looking for, if you do get to the point where you are in a position to spend some money, you've got a marketing budget and you want to look for partners, I think you choose your partners very carefully. Make sure that, they like the game, that they've played the game. Make sure that, you feel comfortable with them as people and they feel passionate about your game. Whether it's PR companies or publishers, you have to make sure that the people that you're working with are the right people, and going in on hope alone just because you've heard good things or they've worked on a certain game is never a good way to go about it. I think it's super important to be, make sure that they're passionate about your game specifically. So.
Thank you. That's really great advice, actually. You just on that last point, you mentioned there are tons of indie games funds out there. Is that right? Can you list a few of those for our users?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends. So there's plenty, depending on where you're located. So I mean, I know the UK has a couple, the US has a couple, Canada has a couple. So there's often like a lot of country-specific ones that go around, whether it's specific game funds or creative funds. There's also a couple of indie game funds that are being set up and or already exist, like Kowloon Knights. So there's, if you do, it only takes like a couple of Google searches and you'll find quite a few around, and it's always worth applying to those type of things just, to be able to try and get that extra bit of funding. And I think, being able to do that works really well. I mean, it depends on what you go for as well. So some countries like Canada, for example, they offer a wider range of different funds. One in particular, I think they have like a marketing fund where they kind of match dollar for dollar the amount that you're going to spend on marketing, because they understand the importance of being able to do a lot of marketing is ultimately going to make the game better. So I would check locally, and then, you know, there's plenty of international ones, but local ones tend to get a little bit better in terms of approvals because they're local. But it's also, but the local ones do have a drawback in the fact that they do tend to have some restrictions in what you can actually use the money for as well.
Thank you. How can our community reach out to you if they want to get in touch?
Sure. So you can just shoot me up on Twitter at the Video Game PR Guy. You can just, you know, head on over to the Vicarious PR website, which is vicariouspr.com, and just shoot me an email. And, you know, even if you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to send to me, you can still shoot me an email and ask my advice on anything. And our team is always happy to, our team's always super happy to talk with indies. Even if you're like in a very early conceptual stage, we're super happy to give you advice on, you know, how to go about creating a marketing calendar or anything like that.
Thank you. And so to everyone, please reach out to Michael. And of course, if you can send him hundreds of thousands of dollars, please do.
Yeah, it's always appreciated.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I'll stop the recording. Thank you.